Hello, and thanks for stopping by. Tucked away beside the southeastern foot of Tower Bridge, Shad Thames is one of London's most atmospheric streets, a canyon-like passage which runs between Tooley Street and a point just beneath Tower Bridge Road. So distinctive is Shad Thames in fact, with its old towering warehouses and walkways which crisscross overhead, that its name has come to define the surrounding area as a whole, encompassing a block which includes other addresses such as Curlew Street, Maguire Street and Gainsford Street. Given its distinctive character, it's no surprise that Shad Thames has featured in numerous film and TV shows over the years, and in this video, as I guide you through the area's rich history, I'll be including a number of clips from such appearances, which highlight just how dramatically this area has changed. In centuries past, long before the warehouses and subsequent fancy apartments showed up, Shad Thames went by a far different name. The area was known as Horselydown, which is believed to have derived from the 12th century term Horseydown, meaning hill by the horse marsh. This name was pretty much literal, as horses were indeed pastured here, the peaceful marshy ground beside the river providing them with lush grass to chew on. The former Horselydown field is clearly shown on the Ralph Agas map, which dates from 1591. Cattle grazed here too, and a popular fair was regularly held, which is why there's a road called Fair Street close to Shad Thames. This name is in fact shortened. The road used to be called Horselydown Fair Street, and it was here, in 1644, that Thomas Guy, the founder of nearby Guy's Hospital, was born. For many years, the land at Horselydown was owned by Bermondsey Abbey, which, founded in the year 1082, was located just south of where Shad Thames now lies. The Knights Hospitaller, originally founded to care for pilgrims to the Holy Land, but which later became a military order involved in the Crusades, also owned property on Horselydown, namely a manor house and a brewery. Brewing ale would later grow to be a major industry here, for it was at Horselydown in 1787 that John Courage founded the famous Courage Brewery. Later known as the Anchor Brewery, this beer factory grew to be very large indeed, and remained in operation here until 1981. The last incarnation of the Anchor Brewery, which still dominates the northwestern end of Shad Thames, dates from the late 1890s, and as with almost every other former industrial site in the area, it's since been converted into shops, restaurants and apartments. John Courage's very first pub though, the Anchor Tap, is thankfully still in business, albeit under a different owner. The tavern as it stands today dates from the mid-19th century and can be found on Horselydown Lane, between the aptly named Brewery Square and Cooper's Row. When Henry VIII dissolved Bermondsey Abbey in 1537, the land at Horselydown was seized and went on to pass through a number of private hands. The Horselydown name lives on to some extent though, in Horselydown Lane, as we've just seen, and also at Horselydown Old Stairs. As their name suggests, Horselydown Old Stairs are very old indeed, many centuries old in fact, and they're one of the oldest surviving examples of such steps which provide access to the Thames. If you're in the area and plan to see them, please do be careful, as the Thames tide is not to be messed with. In the early 1700s, a church, St John at Thames, was built just southwest of Horselydown, between what's now Fair Street and Druid Street. Designed by Nicholas Hawksmoor, this church was once described as having a silly but lovable spire, and it's been theorised that Shad Thames is a derivation of St John at Thames, although I guess to achieve such a pronunciation, you'd have to slur your words as if you were drunk. Sadly, St John at Thames was badly damaged during the Blitz, and after years of neglect, it was demolished altogether in the 1970s, although the old churchyard still remains, as does part of St John's old stone base. The London City Mission now sits upon its foundations. Another theory as to where the name Shad Thames comes from is that it refers to a breed of fish known as shad, also known as the mayfish. There is some weight to this idea, as for many years, the western end of Shad Thames, at the point beneath Tower Bridge, where you can see this old Victorian post box, ran into another lane that had a very distinctly fishy title, the wonderfully named Pickled Herring Street. Once packed with wharves and warehouses, Pickled Herring Street is long lost. It's now covered by the pedestrianised area known as the Queen's Walk, which is a popular tourist hangout thanks to its perfect view of Tower Bridge. I wonder if any of these visitors are aware of the site's former fishy name. From the 16th century onwards, Horselydown, and then as it came to be known, Shad Thames, saw the rise of various small buildings which were constructed to accommodate the growing influx of shipping and cargo coming in on the Thames. This reached its zenith in the 19th century, when the large brick warehouses, which now define Shad Thames, were built. The largest such complex, the largest in all of London in fact, was Butler's Wharf, which opened in 1873. Covering some 25 acres, and named after a former merchant who used to rent space here, the mighty Butler's Wharf would have once been packed with commodities from all over the globe: grain, spice, coffee, tea, and much more. Indeed, due to the amount stored here, it's believed that this building was once the largest tea warehouse in the world. The names of such goods, the pleasing smells of which would have once wafted through these streets, and led Shad Thames to be nicknamed London's Larder, are now recalled in the names of various buildings dotted around the area. Such cargoes were stashed in barrels, which dock workers transferred between buildings by rolling them across the overhead web of crisscrossed bridges. Can you imagine how noisy it would have been here in those days, with the barrels rumbling overhead, dockers shouting across to each other, and the tall warehouse doors, known as loopholes, banging back and forth. The sound of horses clopping along the cobbles would have been common too, especially around the Courage Brewery, where you would have seen many dray horses pulling large vans laden with beer kegs. Today, those dray horses are commemorated by a statue on Queen Elizabeth Street, which stands in the middle of a 1980s development known as The Circle. This grand fellow was sculpted by the artist Shirley Pace, and airlifted into this position by helicopter in October 1987. The horse has an official name. He's called Jacob, a title which was no doubt inspired by an area once located just east of Shad Thames, a place known as Jacob's Island. Occupying an area now roughly bordered by Mill Street, Wolsey Street, George Row and Bermondsey Wall West, Jacob's Island, like Horselydown, was sited upon land once owned by Bermondsey Abbey. St Saviour's Dock, which runs between Shad Thames and the old Jacob's Island, is a name which references that history, as the Church of St Saviour, now known as Southwark Cathedral, was associated with the abbey. It's also at St Saviour's Dock that the subterranean river, known as the Neckinger, enters the Thames. The name Neckinger has a rather gruesome origin, for it's derived from the term devil's necktie, which in turn is a reference to the hangman's noose, for this used to be a spot where pirates and river thieves, tempted by the rich bounties stashed amongst the many warehouses, were executed once caught. Initially, Jacob's Island was a fairly prosperous area, known for boat building. By the late 18th century, however, its fortunes had slid, gradually transforming it into one of London's most dreadful slums. an awful place defined by grinding poverty, horrendous sanitation, and clouds of toxic fumes, which belched out of a local lead mill. So appalling were conditions on Jacob's Island that in the mid-19th century it came to be nicknamed the capital of cholera, due to the high death rates from that disease which flourished here. Jacob's Island was made famous by Charles Dickens, for it was here, in his 1838 masterpiece Oliver Twist, that the most dangerous character he ever created, the violent and truly terrifying criminal Bill Sikes, meets a nasty end. This scene occurs in chapter 50 of the novel, which begins with Dickens describing the area. In Jacob's Island, the warehouses are roofless and empty. The walls are crumbling down. The windows are windows no more. The doors are falling into the streets. The houses have no owners. They are broken open and entered upon by those who have the courage. And there they live, and there they die. After the brutal murder of Nancy, it is to Jacob's Island that Bill Sikes flees, closely pursued by an enraged mob who are baying for his blood. Desperate to escape the crowd, Sikes scrambles up onto the rooftops. Although haunted by the evil deed he's committed, he appears to have a disturbing vision of Nancy's body. Panicked, he stumbles over a parapet, causing the rope he's clinging onto to shoot up and choke him like a noose. He fell for 35 feet, says Dickens. There was a sudden jerk, a terrific convulsion of the limbs, and there he hung. Sadly, in the novel, Bill Sikes' faithful dog, Bullseye, also meets a grisly end on Jacob's Island. After letting out a dismal howl, he attempts to leap after his master and plunges to the ground below. Thankfully, in the slightly more cheerful musical version, 1968's Oliver, Bullseye doesn't die. And in that film, the then derelict New Concordia Wharf on Mill Street was used as a set for Fagin's den. If Fagin wished to run a gang of pickpockets from here today though, it would cost him, as New Concordia Wharf has since been renovated and transformed into luxury accommodation, with apartments here now going for several £1 million apiece. In the late 20th century, as London shipping began to switch to larger container vessels handled by the Essex port of Tilbury, the old warehouses around Shad Thames fell out of use, with the last one finally closing for good in 1972. The area then descended into a grubby, derelict state. There was some positivity though, as a number of artists, including Terence Conran, Derek Jarman, and David Hockney, saw potential in using the old warehouses as accommodation and studio space. This encouraged other creatives to move in too, and before long, a community of 150 artists were living and working in Shad Thames. Unfortunately, following a large fire, safety concerns were raised, which led to the eviction of the Commune in early 1980, which was probably just as well, because a few years later, Shad Thames was overrun by psychopathic bobbies and falling Daleks.
The Dalek sent to the warehouse has been destroyed. How is that possible? The Doctor was aided by...
Terence Conran, however, remained undeterred. Still knowing Shad Thames had great potential, he played a major role in pushing for its regeneration, and between 1985 and 1997, a dramatic overhaul of the area was carried out, creating the Shad Thames that we see today. The area is now very fancy indeed, a far cry from the days when dockers and horses toiled here. When the regeneration was being carried out, many of the private developments threatened to block public access to the riverfront, a situation which was brought to light by the late great actor Bob Hoskins in a 1982 edition of Omnibus, when he took the film critic Barry Norman on a tour of what was then a very run-down area.
Is that London always had a really practical attitude towards the river. Because
It's well worth a watch, so I'll leave a link to the full clip in the description below. Fortunately, a local community activist named Maggie Blake stepped in to campaign for open access to the Thames, a cause which she and her supporters were successful in, and it's thanks to her that we can enjoy these marvellous views today. Quite rightly, Maggie now has a small part of Shad Thames named in her honour, a passageway called Maggie Blake's Cause. So, if you happen to be passing through here, be sure to give her a nod. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this look at the history of Shad Thames, and as always, I'd be interested to hear your own thoughts on this historic area. Do you remember what it was like before the Regeneration? And are there any other films or TV episodes which were filmed here that you can think of? If so, please be sure to let me know in the comments. If you haven't yet subscribed to Rob's London, then I'd appreciate it very much if you could please consider doing so, as this, along with clicking the bell icon to receive notifications, will ensure that you don't miss out whenever I publish a new video. Plus, of course, it'd be wonderful to have you along. If you're feeling extra generous, you can also support my work with a tip via either my Ko-fi account, which I'll link below, or the YouTube thanks button, which appears as a heart icon beneath the video. Any such financial donations are of course greatly appreciated, and they really do help go towards creating content. Anyway, on that note, thanks again for watching friends. Stay well, and please be sure to stay tuned.